Coffee and water. My two. Well, I don't like
And we
water
are
so
live.
much.
So as we're right in the middle of saying, getting ready and preparing my little cup of tea. It is afternoon today, 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Janny's with me in the same time zone. Welcome everybody to Raising Multilinguals Live, and cheers to that.
Hello. Hi from my side of the world. Here it's evening in the Netherlands. My name is Utelima Garibak from Utu's International Lounge. Hello.
All right, so we are very, very glad to have Janny Perez with us today. And let me see, how does she describe herself? So Janny says she is a multilingual parenting mom, bilingual parenting educator, and the host of the Latina Mom Legacy podcast. So I think entrepreneur, right? Educator and podcaster. She's the jack of all trades and everything that has to do with Spanish, English, bilingual education. So welcome, Janny. Thank you very much for taking the time and sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be here.
Fantastic. So, we're all a little stiff right now. So I think, it's always good to start the conversation with a nice icebreaker. And I want to know, it's the first time I think we have a Latina who calls herself a Latina, right? With the sangre caliente here with us. So what would you say is that thing that makes you really feel uniquely Latina? Let's start there.
Well, there are many things that make me feel uniquely Latina.
Pick one. We only have an hour.
But I would say the one thing that I can say that makes me uniquely Colombian, mind you, not just Latina, but Colombian, mind
Chévere.
is every Christmas Eve in our house. I wake up super early. This is a tradition that my father started. He used to get up around 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm not like that, but I will get up around 7, and the music will go on. I'll listen to traditional Colombian folklore music that is typically heard around Christmas, and we call it música de parranda.
Okay.
And I'll start baking, and I'll make natilla, which is like a custard, and buñuelos, which is basically cheesy fried dough that kind of goes with the custard. Okay. And that's a very traditional Colombian thing. And we also make cookies for Santa because we are living in the United States and we have to incorporate that tradition as well. So it's, while here in the US, it's very quiet with the Christmas carols. In our home, we are spicing it up with some parranda, some cumbia, some salsa, and it's a big party at 7 in the morning.
Wow. Well, there you go. My a good friend of mine, his wife is Colombian, and she always says chévere. And every time I hear chévere, it just makes me think of Colombia. So, Nice. It's a great way to start. And I'd like to add that I also get up at 5 a.m. every day, but 5 a.m. Pacific time. So that's 8 a.m. here. So I think I'm okay with that. Okay. So we want to know more. We want to know more about you. So Janny, tell us,
Can I ask something else? Because when we talk about Latina, I know that there is a whole kind of discussions out there with those who say it's Latina, it's Hispano-American or Hispanic, etc. Maybe for those who maybe on my side of the world are not so into the distinction of the different kind of terms, can you maybe highlight what makes a Latina, why Hispanic or American, etc.? What's the difference, or why? Yes. I always ask why make the difference, but I can understand it's a cultural kind of approach or thing.
That's right. Janny and I, we had a discussion here, right? We said it's good to develop on this a little bit. So yeah, great question.
It is a great question, because even within the Latino community, even within different countries, and even within different subcultures, they prefer to be called different things. Yeah. So it's difficult sometimes to educate when within our own culture we don't even know what to call ourselves. So, but in general, I will educate those that are watching. So Hispanic, at least in the US, Hispanic is what the majority of the non-Latino, that's the common term that is used for Spanish speakers, Hispanic. And within Hispanic, everything is included except Brazil, because Hispanic is from Spain and of Spanish-speaking countries. And in Brazil, they speak Portuguese. So within Hispanic, Brazil is not included. So that takes care of that part. But within Latino and the Latino community, why the newer generations do not like to be called Latino is because many want to be gender inclusive. So Latino is a very is masculine form. So you have Latino, Latina, male and masculine. So even within the Latino community, for those perhaps non-binary people, they don't identify between Latino and Latina. So they identify perhaps as Latine with an E, or Latinx. So when you see the term Latinx or Latine, it really is just being gender inclusive. I'm okay with the term Latina. I'm personally okay with the term Hispanic because that's what I grew up with. I don't take offense, but some people within our community do take offense. So the best approach is to ask somebody that is Latino is, what do you like to be called? And some people will tell you, I'm from Mexico, I want to be called Mexican. Mm-hmm. So they don't even call themselves Latino. So that would be the best approach. But in general, Hispanic is the broad term that is kind of universal here in the United States. And then within that, I would say Latino or Latina to address male or female.
Okay, yeah.
Fantastic. A great discussion already. So, but we still don't know too much about you, Janny. Tell us. We want to know everything, but we only have 45 minutes or so. So, but please do start. Tell us what you think is relevant to this discussion about yourself, maybe, your upbringing, and what's that trigger that really got you into this business of helping other parents raise bilingual and multilingual kids?
So I grew up in Miami, in Florida, with in the most Hispanic Latino city of the United States, which is Hialeah, where about 96% of the population speaks only Spanish. So I grew up around very many Spanish speakers. At the age of 13, I went to Colombia and I went to school in Colombia. So I was able to learn written Spanish and learn about my culture. And fast forward to when I moved to New York, met my husband, had my daughter. I knew that I wanted to raise her bilingually, and I knew that I wanted to raise her connected to her Latino roots. And at the time, I had an idea when my daughter was 2 to start a subscription box business for parents that were going through similar things. And it was basically parents would get a box with Spanish language activities that they could do with their child, and they could do that at home. Long story short, that didn't work out so well. I had all this leftover inventory, and I started going to different baby shows and mom shows where I started meeting moms. And I realized that what I loved the most was talking to the moms and sharing their stories. And that's how my podcast was born. And sort of everything from there is kind of brought me where I am today with my courses, workshops, and book, is really in connecting with those moms and helping them to raise bilingual or multilingual or multicultural children.
Wow. So how long has this been going on?
So I started in 2017 was Mi Legacy with the subscription box.
Okay.
And 2019, the podcast was born.
Okay.
And here we are.
And I have to ask this question because I know that someone else might ask it. But what is your background? Are you an educator or a teacher?
So I started my formal education. I started in fashion design, and I've worked in the seasonal products, so designing Halloween costumes for many years. So I started many years ago teaching university adults, kids. I call them kids now, but students. I would teach them fashion. I would teach them design, and that was my first role as an educator and as a mentor, and I loved it. And I loved it. When I started Mi Legacy, all I knew was product development and how to create product, and I knew that the message for Mi Legacy has always been the same, but I didn't know how to get that message, and I only knew how to do that with what I knew how to do at the time, and that was through product. So that's how that evolved. Wow. But no, I'm not a journalist. I'm not a broadcaster. I'm not just
a linguist.
Somebody. I'm not a linguist or speech pathologist, and I'm very upfront about that. But I have, over the years, interviewed many specialists and learned a lot from them, and really have adapted sort of my own system to help parents. That it's coming from the parents' perspective in a very practical way. Yes, taking into account all of the things that the linguists and the specialists say, but really in a more practical mom application and approach.
Wow, what an enviable position to be in, though. You productization. I don't know, because Mitu and I, we've brainstormed a lot about productizing, certain things, but it's not easy.
I
right?
do. I do.
Right. So
it's you have to love what you do, and you have to have a passion for it.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
raising bilingual and multilingual children, for me, it's not something that's going to make you rich, because the message behind it is very powerful. And for me, the mission is always to educate the mom and the dad one at a time, in terms of how, especially within our Latino community, I'm specifically addressing the Latino community here in the US, especially from a place of empowerment, of socioeconomic growth, and a place that's going to uplift the community. And it doesn't really happen in many places. And even within our community, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of silence. And I sort of bring to light all those issues and all those topics that people don't really want to talk about, or they want to sweep under the rug, and for their growth. So that's why I say it's not something that's going to get you rich.
What?
But yeah. Anyway.
No, but I mean, it's a mission. Like we all are on this mission. Some more, successful than others. But what I find very interesting in you is really you target the Latino group. I know we had this term before. Let's put it aside. So Spanish speaking families in your side of the world, and you mentioned the socioeconomic status, and I think maybe that was one of the triggers for you also, because you see the situation with Spanish in the US. How to empower families and to make them feel proud of their heritage language and to transmit it to their children. Was that one of the reasons that made you create the Mi Legacy and all the rest?
Actually, it's not. I really wanted to start just connecting with other moms and helping them teach their children Spanish. That was how it started at the beginning, as just Spanish with cultural connection. What has happened over the years in meeting, speaking, interviewing so many moms that perhaps have shame, that perhaps don't speak the language, that perhaps want to pass down the language, but there is a lot of healing that needs to happen with that. And in speaking with them, I realized that this is not about Spanish. This is not about a language like learning another language. For Latinos, especially for Latinos within the United States that have immigrated, that are children of immigrants, this is a bigger problem, that a bigger issue that hits on a much deeper level, because it has to do with cultural identity. And when you lose part of your cultural identity, it's hard to feel a connection to where you live, when part of you is sort of lost, or part of you sort of has died off somewhere. So part of it is also helping those parents that perhaps whose parents didn't speak the language to them, is helping them work through those feelings, those emotions, in order to be able to reclaim the language and part of their cultural ancestry, so that they can pass down the language moving forward. Because now the new generation is beginning to understand the value of being bilingual and being multilingual, whereas perhaps their parents didn't as much.
Holy gamoly, I'm drowning. We're jumping right into the deep end here. It's a great start, but I do want to take a breather, give a little shout out to the folks watching us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So welcome. We are talking to Janny today, our especialista in Spanish and English bilingual education and raising bilingual, multilingual kids in the U.S. So we've already started to touch upon it a little bit, but let's drill it down a little. Like, of these folks that you help on a daily basis, what are the most common challenges that first generation and second generation Latinos face with respect to language and culture? I mean, I'm sure there are differences between those who came here as a first generation and those like you just touched upon a little bit, those who may have grown up in the States without learning Spanish for whatever reason, right? So tell us.
So first, for those that are watching or perhaps listening, want to educate you on the differences. And within the first and second generation, the even subcategories, if you will. So first generation is adult immigrants that have immigrated to the U.S., right? My parents were first generation. Second generation are those U.S. born with parents that are immigrants. However, within the first and second generation, there are subgroups like me. So you have the 1.5 generation. Pardon. The 1.5 generation are those that immigrated to the U.S. as children. They're foreign-born children, but they immigrated to the U.S. as children. And 1.75 generation are those that immigrated to the U.S. as babies. And why?
Okay.
Still foreign born, but babies. I'm technically 1.75 generation now.
Wow. This is like common knowledge. I mean, it's not something you categorize. It's out there.
No. This is how they're beginning to categorize within the generations, because the tendency is to lump all Latinos under one group and view us all as one group, and try to sell us products and messaging under one group and lump us as one category. The reality and the truth is that within generations, we are very different. So while first going to the challenges, first generation will face challenges that they want to assimilate to the country. They want to learn English. Therefore, they're too focused, or they may be too focused on the English language for their purposes, and therefore their children may not grow up speaking Spanish. They may hear their parents speak Spanish, but because their parents are so focused on assimilation and on their families fitting in, that the focus may be English, so that sort of gets lost. If you're in the middle, if you're a 1.5 generation or 1.75, I mean, I come kind of a little bit of both because I went back to Colombia, but if you're in the middle, you're going to have sort of the best of both worlds, because you're going to have that cultural connection because you're born in Latino America or in a foreign country. You come to the U.S., your struggles now are sort of identification between both cultures. You feel like you're neither Latino, you're neither American. So you have sort of like, well, where do I fit in? Where do I belong? You feel like you don't belong. And then when you have the 1.75 to second generation, which their first memories are American memories. Their first language perhaps may be Spanish, that they don't identify with the Latino culture, even though their families say they're Hispanic or they're Latino, then they tend to grow up not speaking Spanish. And then when they grow up and realize the value, or they try to reclaim that language and heritage, then they go back and they relearn Spanish. So it's very interesting and important to see the differences between within the Latino generations in the United States.
It's a very particular situation, I must say. If I compare it to those that I know this side of the world, but also in more international kind of contexts, we would not make this distinction of first generation. Well, yes, of the generation, yes. The first generation of immigrants is somehow, you want to adjust to the host culture and language as much as you want, sometimes also giving up your heritage language, especially if it's not considered prestigious enough in the place that you move to. But then with the second generation, and this back and forth is very interesting for me, because many families I know, they don't even consider going back to their countries of origin. They go to the next one, or they stay for a longer period of time, and they try also to maintain those languages. And I try to situate myself. I'm more like a 1.75 to 2 generation if I would translate it into my situation. But I still have German, and I transmit German to my children. But that's another thing. It also has to do with if in the country then you live, if you have the opportunity to go to school in your language. So I mean, in the US you have this opportunity. Here, if we have 20, 80 different languages, it's not possible to have the schools in those languages. But yeah.
So did you know about this, Ute? This 1.5, 1.75?
No, not in that kind of things. But I know about the first, the second, the third generation, and how it decreases, and the language attrition and loss is increasing.
But I totally find it relevant, because technically the first generation is the first generation that came to this land, and the second generation are those who were born here and basically grew up here. But there are these intermediates, and I find that it's a funky way to say 1.5, 1. I mean, if while we're on this topic, is there a specific range where you go 1.5 is from what age to what age, 1.75 is what age to what age, or I don't know, 1.25, does that exist?
Yeah, I mean, we can get really technical, but generally, like the 1.5 generation, 1.5 generation would be children. I would say like children 6, 7 and older, up until teens. Not adults, because once you're 17, 18, you're technically considered an adult here. The 1.75 would be the really young children, the babies that really have very little recollection of their birth country. So like I came here, I was 6 months old. I'm technically 1.75. The fact that I went back later on, kind of, I'm now sort of like in the middle, but technically I would be like one, because my first memories were American memories. They were not Colombian memories.
But what I wanted to highlight again is this tendency to also go back to the country in order to give, like yourself experienced, to experience also the school, the language, the culture at some point, for some of these children, right? For some of these families.
I think what's happening now, especially with the newer generation, is that because many of our parents, many of that first generation, had so much trauma attached and were shamed so much to speak the language, that the second generation, like, the 1.5 and beyond, I'll just say, is now feeling sort of a need to sort of speak up for that generation, and to really work through the trauma and through the healing and reclaim some of their ancestry and that language, because they understand of why their parents or why their grandparents lost language. It wasn't by choice, it was by a need. And now in the US, you see a lot of the younger generation feeling very proud, feeling a lot of cultural pride for their heritage, and whether they're born there or not born there, they just have that pride, and that's showing up in businesses, and it's very powerful. So that's why, for me, that part is showing up. But I feel like within our community, the language needs to show up a little bit more, so they both go hand in hand.
I love it. I love it. But and so this pride thing, the first generation comes in, has this trauma, and you think that translates into the second generation, as in that influences them and like sort of pushes them to sort of negate their heritage in a way?
Sure, and it differs within families. I mean, it absolutely differs within families. I mean, when you are an immigrant, you come to this country, and you come from a place of fear, or perhaps you're fleeing your country out of fear, and you want to find a new home and start fresh. Perhaps you don't want your children to have that trauma attached, because it comes with the language, because it comes with so much. And when you start to assimilate to the country, you don't want your children to have the same traumas, to have the same hurt that perhaps you did. And what happens many times within that first generation is that the parents really don't know the benefits of bilingualism,
Yeah.
and really what the opportunity, because they don't see it as opportunities for their children. They see it as a detriment, like something that's going to hurt them. And that's part of also what I do, is to educate that first generation, saying, no, like, speak to your children in Spanish. You're doing them better. You're doing them a service rather than harm, even though you think like, yes, there are issues that we have to work through. Yes, there are things, but the language don't incorporate the language into everything else that's going on. Like, really speak to your children in Spanish, because they're going to benefit from it as adults and as older children.
Yeah. I mean, there are studies that also justify this choice of not passing on that language, especially if then the parents have been traumatized, because you pass on the trauma through the language. So when this happens, it's psychologically seen maybe not so healthy, but that is where you say it's actually something that you have to work on the trauma first, and then use the language as a balm somehow, as something that makes you feel yes, validated, valued, and be proud of again in the new setting and in the new environment. But it's a very delicate question, and I think every family is different, right? Every family has their own story and history.
Absolutely. And so what ends up happening many times is when that language isn't passed down, and the second generation, or that in between generation, works to heal that trauma, because again, they see the value of passing that down to their children. They're the ones that have to work through that generational trauma that has been passed down. It's not up to that first generation, because that first generation is very likely not going to change. So it's up to that 1.5 generation or second generation to really work through that healing process and what that looks like for them, in order to be able to sort of reclaim that, and perhaps relearn Spanish and go to therapy. And there's a lot of healing that happens.
Yes.
Well, I think we continue to sort of get ahead of ourselves here. I think my next question is already partially, I guess, answered here with respect to like first generation not speaking the language to the kids. That's it's an obvious one, I guess. But over the years, right? You've seen many families. There must be other typical mistakes that you say, if you can avoid it. Something that you help them avoid?
I think one of the most common I don't know if we say a mistake, because I don't like
Yeah.
labels, and especially
Yeah.
when it comes to bilingual parenting.
Yep.
But one thing that parents can work on is really more language exposure for the child. Because what happens many times is the first generation, the grandparents, they'll be speaking Spanish, and perhaps the second generation thinks that if their child is around grandma enough, they'll just like pick up the language and they'll become fluent. And they don't. So you'll see within the three, you'll see grandma's talking to the daughter, to the mom in Spanish. Okay, the mom is talking to the grandmother in Spanish, but then the mother's talking to the child in English, and then the child is talking English to the grandma, and the grandma's responding in Spanish. So within the generations, there isn't as much consistency in terms of speaking Spanish to the child, and that's, for me, that's a big one, because children need to be hearing the language. They need to be conversing. You can't expect them to just be with grandma an hour a week and for them to be fluent. You can't really expect a child to acquire language that way. But I also recognize that every family is different, and children also learn differently. So within that, there are varying degrees of how much language exposure is needed for children, or what that looks like within a child. But overall, I would say more Spanish, if you can speak the more Spanish, or whatever your minority language is, and really try to make it quality focused. And
Here,
I really like
define quality for us, just to
Yeah,
sure.
For me, it's very important for people to build, for children to have a positive connection to the language.
Hallelujah.
For the child not to feel forced, for the child not to feel shame. One thing some parents is, only speak to me in Spanish. And then if the child wants to express themselves in the best way that they can, whether it's English or whether it's sign language, whatever and the parent says, no, háblame en español, you're sort of negating your child's feelings at that moment. And so what I like to teach parents is try to build that emotional positive connection to the language first. And if your child wants to express themselves in whatever language, that put their needs first above the language, before anything else. So for me, I was taught, en esta casa solo se habla español. We only speak Spanish in this house. So I was afraid to speak up. I was afraid to approach my mother about certain topics. And so I have certain negative connotations to Spanish when it comes, because of the emotion. So with parents is try to build that positive connection to the language. And I say, think about your first dog, your first concert, your first boyfriend, your first, like all those first events that were very meaningful for me. Try to make that first for your child in that minority language, in that language that you want your child to learn, because I think it's gonna help them have that positive connection.
Nice. We had a guest a few months ago. I think it was around the end of last year, and Dr. Carlos Lopez, and he was talking about association for kids. How he watched, what was it? I think he watched Dragon Ball, this Japanese anime, in Catalan, and that allowed him to like he loved that cartoon, so he learned Catalan, had a very nice association, positive association with the language, whereas he had a negative experience in what's the other one? Portuguese or some other language. I forget which one, but he said that was like a burden, and he just didn't like it, and so this emotional connection that you talk about is very, very important. Yeah, we want to prioritize the kids, what they want, what they like, and if you find their interest, just support that, right? Just build in the whole ecosystem or infrastructure around that, so that they can increase that type of quality exposure that that you talk about. So fully aligned, fully on board here. All right, so let's move out of the family a little bit and talk about the education system. Then you live in the U.S. I guess the U.S. education system is the one that you know best. What do you think they should do to better cater to the needs of parents raising children to speak Spanish? I mean, this is obviously applicable to other communities and other languages, right? So, and to the students themselves. What do you think are the things that they should invest in?
I mean, they should definitely invest in more early language programs. Many of the programs here in the United States start at middle school, many language programs. And I feel like should take advantage of those early years, those golden years where children are most receptive to language learning and to acquiring different languages. So they definitely don't take advantage of that. And when the schools do offer foreign language, whether it's Spanish, whether it's French, whatever that foreign language is, for me, ideally, it would be something that is part of the curriculum every day, just like you do math, just like you do science, just like, just a part of the daily curriculum. Here, it's typically once a week for maybe 30 minutes, an hour if you're lucky. And the immersion schools, if you want to put your child in a dual language immersion school, those, depending on where you live, are very few and far between. And for many of those, it's a lottery system. So there is no guarantee. You have to many times, not even within your district, you don't even qualify. So it just makes it very challenging. The other side of it is when you do have those immersion schools and usually they're for ESL students or mostly immigrant students that speak Spanish or that speak other languages. What happens is that there is a tendency to for the education to be a subpar level, because still there is a general within the educational system that bilingualism is, or Spanish speaking children perhaps don't learn at the same rate than English speaking students. So what ends up happening is that the schools that are Spanish speaking, perhaps dual language, in some of the especially minority communities, the quality of the education is subpar to the normal public school. So while you think you may be doing your child a service by putting them in a bilingual or dual lingual public school, you may be doing them more harm. So it just sort of depends on the county, the state, the programming, and really what the resources are. But generally, there is within the country, it's very frustrating that language learning is not seen like it's seen in Europe as an asset, as something that's going to help you, grow economically as a society. Here, it's still many times viewed as something that sort of hurts the country and hurts society. So it's just a very limiting belief that's very hard to break.
Yeah, it would be somehow, while you were speaking, I was thinking of, is there a map? Because I help families who then also transfer to the UK, and sometimes they have Spanish and English as languages, and others as well, and to know exactly which state to go and where to find schools that are more supportive towards multilingualism, because this is what we're talking about usually.
Yeah.
That would be very helpful to have someone who says, okay, you are going to move, choose that. It's better than this other one. But so I dream of a map. I dream actually of a world map, not only from the US, but as today we're talking about US, I mean, it would be nice to have a world map Tetsu, that is just a hint.
But, do it.
With language-friendly schools, and this is a hint to Ellen Rose and to Emmanuel. But you were just mentioning now the fact also, it is not seen as an asset to speak another language. And this was exactly what my question was related to this one, is how is the response from those who grow up with only English, because they are an English-speaking family, towards Spanish. So in those schools where you have two languages or maybe more, how are they dealing with learning Spanish? Are they learning Spanish? Do they want to learn Spanish? How is their feeling about this other language? I mean, it can be all kind of others, because I know some grown-ups who were happy to learn Spanish while they were living in the US. But I would like to know how it's the situation now, or the one that you experience.
I think it varies, again, depending on what state you live in. Going back to your map, generally, I mean, and not to like, I really don't like politics a whole lot, but generally, the Democratic states will have stronger language programs than the Republican states. I mean, that's just how it is. So if you have states like California, states like New York, those will typically have more language and dual language. Even here in Jersey, there are a lot more dual immersion programs. So that can sort of help somebody if they're navigating, like look for the blue states. I'm neither here nor there, so I'm just like somewhere in the middle, but that's sort of kind of a general guide. Within the schools, it sort of depends on where you're located. And again, it goes back to education, because I recently interviewed a preschool, a dual immersion preschool founder. She has a dual immersion preschool program in California. And she said to me, 90%, even though she's in California, with a large Latino population, she said 80 to 90% of her students are non-Latino. And she's a Latina herself. So within that, I mean, that just shows you that still there needs to be a lot more education from the bottom up within our communities, within the communities to help support the language learning. Because here in the United States, over 70, I think it's like 77% of the bilingual Spanish teachers are Anglo. And so there's a big discrepancy here in terms of, you have the biggest minority population is Latino. You have possibly the most Spanish-speaking country outside of Latin America. And within that, the speakers, the educators are non-Latino. So there's a big disconnect within education. So I think it varies. Going back to your question, some parents will want to speak, but for the fact is that they will seek support in many ways within the community in order to help their students or their children in those dual immersion classes. I know I've worked with particular parents that have their children in dual immersion programs, and they come to me because they seek support and other resources in order to get this, because they don't feel as supported within the community. And that's difficult. That's difficult when you want to raise a bilingual child, but you don't feel like your environment supports you. In Europe, your environment supports you. Many countries are bilingual. And so here it's very different.
Well, Uta and I have a common acquaintance called Fabrice Jomo. And he wrote a book called The Bilingual Revolution. And in it, he talks about getting parents involved and getting them to set up various infrastructures within the schools of their district, and that kind of, I guess, parent power, right? Getting them to make the changes, getting them to group. Do you know of any efforts like that in the Latino community?
Yeah, sure. I know of a number of groups within the community that are creating sort of smaller educational programs. One is called the Language Preservation Project, and their goal is to help parents reclaim culture and language
Nice.
in different areas of the United States, and they host, and they're it's all free. It's all free for the
Wow,
community.
that's fantastic.
So yes, and I mean that's a great support for parents wanting to raise bilingual children. I know of another company. She's putting out her company's called Charla Collective, and what she's doing is she's doing like little mini groups throughout the U.S. where they do like uh, Spanish language, like kind of like play dates for the children and for the adults as well. Again, to have that sense of community. And my goal with the podcast is to bring to light those companies and to bring to light those resources for our community so that they're able to, hopefully, if it's in their area, to have access to that. Because again, education, we want to educate within the community so that we can empower our children to be the next leaders.
Wonderful, wonderful. So it's a good chunk of time that we've dedicated to education, and we are getting to for it's almost 1:50 here, so we have to start getting closer to the finish line here, and we still have 2 hour two questions left.
2 hours.
2 hours, we wish. So let's go to the Janny, the author. All right, you have a book called Nobody Told Me This about raising a bilingual child. So
Yes.
let's bring up some stuff, some tidbits from your book for us. Some
So
fun examples, anecdotes.
I don't know if you can see it. I just okay. That's
There we go.
kind of the book.
Love it.
So
Love
this was an easy read. I call it an easy read. This is something that I wanted to create for parents in terms of, again, from the parenting perspective, from the mom's perspective. When I started raising my daughter bilingually, I read many books, but I felt I was very overwhelmed by the amount of information. And I
We get
wanted,
that a lot.
yes, I wanted and I'm a big nerd. I'm a self-proclaimed nerd. So, but I really wanted any parent, and this is not just for Spanish only. This is for any parent that wants to raise a bilingual or multilingual child in any language. I wanted them to have an easy read, a book that you can read in a couple days, a long afternoon if you want, that really just sort of guides you along the way in terms of the things that nobody told me or nobody tells you when you're embarking on this journey of bilingual parenting. And I wanted to offer them tips and resources that have helped me and that have helped many of the moms that I've interviewed, and suggestions from many of the specialists that I've interviewed in terms of bilingual parenting. So it's all those sort of bits of information that I've learned over the many years condensed into a very easy read. And I created it like a workbook so that there are activities for the parents to sit down and really sort of kind of plan certain things or write out certain things and get some of those deeper emotions out that have been tied to language that perhaps they need to work through.
Wow. So is there a little preview, little example that you
So I
can
can
give us?
so
Give
all
us
the
a
chapters
taste, so that we want to.
so all the chapters are very short. I mean, they're like a couple pages. It's not, like I said, it's an easy read. But going back to the importance of creating a positive emotional connection. I'll read a little bit from that. I was raised in a house where the motto "En esta casa solo se habla español." We only speak Spanish in this house was used. For many years, I resented my parents for forcing me to speak Spanish, especially when I wanted to express myself in other ways. You may say I rebelled quite a bit, and when my parents decided to move us from the US to Colombia at the age of 13, well, let's just say I gave my parents more than they bargained for. Even though I initially hated my parents for having us move to my birth country, which I had very few memories of, As I grew up, I realized how powerful an emotional connection I had with it, and thus the language. It created memories of being around my extended family, laughing and playing games. It brought folklore, legends alive. I experienced some of my most memorable experiences in Spanish, like my first concert, my first hike in the mountains, my first neighborhood Christmas fiesta, my first boyfriend. You get the idea. The emotional connection is so strong that I can tell you that I pray and curse in Spanish. When I started raising my daughter bilingually, I knew that I didn't want her to resent the language or me. I didn't want to create a forceful environment, but I did want to create an intentional one. That meant being understanding if my daughter couldn't express herself in one language and preferred the other. That meant practicing a lot of patience and doubting myself whether she was learning enough. Most importantly, I wanted to make sure that she was having strong, positive emotional connections to the language so she could view the language as a positive force in her life. How have I helped her create a strong, positive connection to the language when she is not immersed in the language or culture as I was, when she lives away from her extended family, and when we are also incorporating a third language? Focus on making it fun, make it an impactful, and making memories. I wish somebody would have told me that. And then I go on and I have 5 tips. I have 5 tips on how they can make it impactful, make memories, and so kind of for every chapter, it's something like a little story or a little connection, and then very practical, sort of useful tips that they can use and apply in their life.
That's wonderful. So you can find this on Amazon, I suppose.
You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on
hard copies.
You can find it at Barnes and Noble as well, and it's available in hard copy. You can Kindle, so you can download it on Kindle, and paperback.
That's what I
as
did.
well.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
It's a very fun read indeed.
Yeah, and I would like to point out one thing. I think also your podcast is more geared towards moms. You were talking about that you have interviewed moms, etc. But we have Tetsu here, we have Yoshito. I know many dads who are also very active in Allenbeck, who are very active in supporting the multilingualism in their children. So I suppose that this mom is just one kind of thing, but it actually means parents. Right, so you're addressing parents.
Yes, I would say 95% of my guests are moms, and I would say 90% of them are Latina moms. I mean, I've had a few that are multicultural moms as well. But the podcast is the Latina Mom Legacy, and my goal with the podcast is to empower not just about the language, but also we talk about culture, we talk about traditions, we talk about foods, we talk about those things that we want to pass down to our children. And within the Latino community, I've learned so much interviewing these moms out of so much of the culture within Latin America. We're so different, and our foods and even our dialects, and that I focus mostly on that so that any Latina mom around the world, wherever she lives, she can feel that connection to her culture, and have those little tidbits of information. They're like, oh, I remember when my grandma did that with us, or oh, my grandma used to say that, or oh, it that holds a very special place in my heart. So that's my soft spot, but it's not limited to them.
Yes, and you just mentioned also when you were quoting from your book, you're raising your daughter with 3 languages. So your husband is Bulgarian. So what role does Bulgarian have in all this? Because sorry if I ask this, but when I see some other parents who also focus on one language, I know someone else is focusing on Italian, the other one on German, and I know that their partners have an additional language, and I always say, okay, we are, or you are so adamant about passing on your language. What about the dad's language or the partner's language? To be fair now, not to make this difference, but what about that? Because we need to somehow find a way to balance them. I mean, we are balancing 5, 6, 7, 8 languages, right? So it's not easy, but it is possible. And how do you do that in your family?
I think first, the spouse or the partner has to decide that it's something of importance for them. And that is something that the other spouse can perhaps somewhat take on, but it's not their sole responsibility. So in our home, my husband speaks Bulgarian. If you ask me, it's not enough not as much as I know she needs, or as much as I would like. So when the spouse doesn't take that role of quote teacher, then it's up to the other parent to sort of see how they can get that language, how can they get that additional support for exposure to the language. So in my case, I told my mother-in-law, who's Bulgarian, that what I wanted for my daughter was Bulgarian classes. And so we enrolled her in a Bulgarian school. So my daughter attends Bulgarian school on the weekends, on Sundays, and it's a way for her to build connection to her culture through this organization. They do a lot of presentations. They're very involved within the Bulgarian culture, and I love it. They've adopted me as a part of their community, even though I don't speak very much Bulgarian, just a few words here and there. And we will be going to Bulgaria in a couple weeks, immersing my daughter in Bulgarian camp for a couple weeks, so that she can, again, have that positive this is her first time going to Bulgaria, so that she can have that positive connection, that language exposure. My goal is she can read Bulgarian, she can read the Cyrillic alphabet. She's still, again, like with Spanish, not fluent, but my goal is that once she's immersed in that, perhaps she will show more interest in terms of language explosion, and be able to pick a lot more of that up. And the goal is to alternate between Colombia and Bulgaria every year, so that she continues to get that language exposure from both. But sometimes it may, even though both parents speak two different languages, it may be one parent is more focused on the child learning both languages than both parents. So that's also included in my book, that I wish somebody told me that your spouse may not be as supportive as you think they should be.
Yes. Yeah. That's a very big part of it, right? So Tetsu and I are very, very lucky to have partners who are on the same page and very supportive in this.
Yeah, it makes the journey much easier.
Yes.
It's not impossible to raise a bilingual or multilingual child without their support, or without their as much of their support, but it is more challenging, of course.
It is more challenging, but I think it also gives you a little bit of reality check, so that you can say, okay, with what I have, the situation that I have, without stressing my partner, because I mean, it's like with sports. I always make the comparison with sports. If my partner doesn't like playing volleyball, I won't force him. I'm lucky that my husband does. So we even play the same sports. But if that's not the case, then you can find the golden Mittelweg. It's practically the way in between, and find a solution about that. And you readjust your language goals, right?
Absolutely. That's one thing that I speak with parents is, do your language expectations really meet?
Yeah.
What your environment supportive to meet those expectations? Because if you want to raise a child to speak 4 languages, but you speak 3, but your spouse only speaks English, like, are you going to be, is it realistic for you to, like, how about we just focus on 2 or 1, and have your husband focus, or your wife focus on the other, and start there and then build up from there? But is it realistic for you to, like, want to raise your baby to speak 5 languages when you don't have the support within your environment to do that? So managing expectations is big.
Absolutely. And speaking of managing, well, we have to manage our time, and we are down to the last minute. We are down to the last question, and I need to know, so I'm going to ask it. Okay. You give workshops, and I'd like to know, over the years, what are some of the common issues that you help parents solve? Like, this is not a theoretical thing. Now it's more of a practical thing. Like, you got to sit down and you're solving maybe their personal problems that are directly relevant in their family situation, or I don't know, you have like a standard fictitious scenario. I don't know how do you go about this and make this stick? It's a thing to
So
make it stick, right?
yes, yes. So the I think the most parents coming in that want to raise bilingual or multilingual children want to know the tools, the methods, what's going to work, what should I do,
Mm-hmm.
and what I teach them is that you have to first know where you're at, what your starting point is, what your proficiency level is, what does your environment look like, what do you want your child, what do you want their proficiency level to be? Like, is it okay for them to have just general knowledge? Do you want them to just communicate, or do you want them to be fluent? Like within that bilingual or multilingual range, like what are your expectations? And then what is your why? What is your reason for wanting to raise bilingual children? And I do an exercise where we sort of peel back the layers and really go deep to understand why they want to do this, because this is a long journey. This is not something that happens overnight. And the tendency is that when it gets difficult or when the parents do not see the results, they give up and they stop, right? The goal really is to get down to a much deeper level in terms of why they want to raise their children bilingually, and that's varies for each person. When they understand, and even within couples, it's going to vary between the husband and the wife, or the partners. Once you understand that, that really is sort of going to be your motivation in terms of why you'll go back to that. And then from there you can get all the tools, right? You'll discover what are the tools, what are the resources, but it's really getting that parent to know where their starting point is, where they want to go, their why, and really committing. This is the one thing, if there's one thing that you take away from watching today, is if you commit that you're going to raise a bilingual or multilingual child, I promise you, if you have that internal commitment, you will raise a bilingual or multilingual child, and you will find the resources, and you will. But you have to have that commitment early on. You have to be able, you can't be like, oh, well, I'd like to, maybe. It would be nice to. If you have that commitment that you will, you will.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I kind of coach parents is get them in the right mindset to be able to then take it from there and get all the tools and all the resources that they need, like the classes, the immersion, all that stuff comes later on.
Yeah. Yes. You were mentioning you have to do this early on, but actually people can also start later. I mean, if you, for whatever reasons, you couldn't make it earlier, it's never too late then
Absolutely.
to introduce a language and to have that. May I ask what age group or parents of what age group of children are you targeting?
So for most of the workshops and the course, my online course, it's 0 to 6. For the podcast, it's really all children, because even adult children, because when I interview moms, they have children that can range in the teens or even adult children, and we talk about how that changes over the years, and in difficulties during the teen years. So really, if you have older children, the podcast is probably the best place. But if you have younger children, definitely the workshops and my online parenting course, bilingual parenting course.
Okay.
All righty. Wow, that sounds like a nice place to take it to the end, I guess.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So, Janny, where can we find you on the internet?
On the interwebs, you can find me at Legasi, and that's how you spelled MILEGASI.com. You can find everything there, the blogs, the courses, everything. And you can also listen to me on the Latina Mom Legacy podcast, and that is available on all major podcast platforms, or you can also go to Mi Legacy and you can listen to it there as well. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Every time we have somebody here with us, we learn something new, and we also grow, not just as hosts, but as parents ourselves. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your knowledge, your experience. It's a tremendous tremendous pleasure to have you on our show. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. It definitely was a pleasure from my end. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. And thank you to everybody who did tune in today. We didn't get any questions from the audience today, but I don't think we had the time to actually fit it in. But I do want to mention that next week, Uta and I will be here for the last time before we go on a little break. So next week we will be Uta and I will be on here at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern and 7 p.m. Central European time, and we'll say our last few words before we take a little break for the month of August.
Yes.
Okay, and then we'll be back in September for more for the rest of the year. So, yes. Any last words, Uta?
No, I think you summed it up nicely. Thank you very much, Janny, for being our guest today. It was very inspirational, and yeah, I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. So we'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.
Bye.